our presentations tonight, we have first the state of the schools based on the report card. I'm excited to hear it. I got to preview this afternoon, so I'm going to introduce Mr. Rosenbaum and Ms. Urbeck to come on up and present on the state of the schools through the lens of the report card. Do we need to put that on the floor before they start?
It's a presentation.
Okay.
It's a presentation.
Okay. Good evening, Madam President, members of the board, Superintendent Paporis, Mr. Vasek. My name is Cindy Urbeck. I am the elementary curriculum coordinator, and presenting with me is
Tim Rosenbaum, the secondary curriculum coordinator. Today we're going to be talking about an overview of the district's rating on the state report card. We'll do a review of each component that contributes to the overall rating, and then we'll do a review to highlight some of the items and initiatives on the district achievement plan that are used to improve instruction and student achievement. When we talk about the state report card, it's important to understand when students take Ohio State tests and in what subjects. This slide just represents when students take an ELA assessment, math assessment, or science assessment in grades 3 through 8. And at the high school, we have the end of course tests, which are taken in ELA 2, Algebra 1, Geometry, Biology, American History, and American Government. Each component has different measures that make up that component, but the majority of the measures come from the students taking these tests, which are primarily taken in the springtime. There's an overall rating for the district on the state report card, and that's a new feature for the state report card. Not only is there an overall rating out of 5 stars, but you can have half stars. There are 5 components that contribute to that rating. If you look up at the board, you'll see that there's actually 6 different components. However, in the top right, college, career, workforce, and military readiness component, that is report only and does not contribute to the overall rating. In addition, if you look at each of the 5 ratings, achievement, progress, early literacy, gap closing, and graduation, some of those measures or some of those components have multiple measures within that component. So for example, in the bottom right, gap closing has 6 different measures, where achievement in the top left only has 1 measure. Of those 5 different components that make up the overall rating, it is based on a weighted average. So in the bottom left of the screen, you'll see that achievement and progress make up 28.601% each of the overall weighted average, where the graduation rate, gap closing, and literacy make up 14.266% each. A rating of 3 out of 5 stars indicates that the district met state standards. We received a 2.5 stars, which indicate that we need support to meet state standards. However, if you'll notice, it's in the green band there, and we were very close to 3 stars.
okay, this next slide shows an overview of each component and our overall rating and the ratings earned in each component. As Tim mentioned, remember that there are several components that include multiple measures, and we will go into more detail about those this evening. Also, remember that while the overall measure has half stars, each component is only rated by full stars. There's no half stars in the components.
Progress is the first component that we'll look into a little more closely. We received 4 out of 5 stars in progress again this year. The progress component measures the academic performance of students compared to expected growth on the state test. So the state looks at students overall to determine what is expected growth, and then they compare current achievement, meaning their actual achievement, to prior achievement on Ohio State tests to measure that growth. If there are previous tests, the most recent test accounts for 67% of like the average value-added progress measure, it's called, and then 33% is based on any prior year's assessment. Here's kind of a visual just to go through what that looks like. At the bottom you have the different measures or different tests for progress. At the very bottom, if there's 2 tests which we're currently rating this measure on, we're looking at the most recent test score, which again is 67%, and then the prior year overall value added, which is 33%. that gets brought together to be the calculation which indicates the rating for the progress measure. There are two measurements that they look at to determine how many stars you get in progress. The growth index and the effect size are used to determine if the district met or exceeded growth. You'll notice that 3 stars indicates that there was evidence in those two measures that the district met growth expectations, where 4 stars means that there's significant evidence that the district exceeded student growth expectations. And again, those growth expectations are set by the state, and we were at 4 stars. So of those two measures, we fell into the significant evidence of exceeding student expectations. On the next slide, we're looking at each of those individual tests to determine did we either meet expectations, exceed expectations, or fall short of expectations. Anything in a shade of blue means that we exceeded expectations, green means that we met expectations, and yellow or red means that we fell short of student growth expectations for that specific test. The top row is showing all grades in ELA, math, and science, where the last column is showing grades overall. So for example, 4th grade, we have ELA mathematics, but science is not tested, so you'll see NA there. Science is tested in 5th grade and 8th grade. At the bottom, you'll see the end of course test for ELA 2, algebra, geometry, biology, American history, and American government.
Okay, then progress, as we have trended in progress, we've scored well in progress over the years. That progress is what will eventually lead to achievement, which is the next component we're going to talk about. So the achievement component measures student academic achievement using each level of performance on the Ohio State tests. There are 2 measures that make up this component. There's performance index and performance indicators. Performance index accounts for the level of achievement for every student, whether they were proficient or not. It uses students' performance level results on Ohio State tests, and it looks at the higher the score result, it results in a higher level of achievement. The performance indicator section is a report only, so while it's on the report card, it does not factor into the overall star rating. But it's looking at the percentage of students scoring proficient or higher, and it disaggregates the information a little bit more. So it's very useful as we are, as a district leadership team, planning and trying to figure out what we want to do moving forward. So again, this slide is just showing you 100% of the performance index contributes to the achievement component, where the report card, the performance indicators rather, are only used for reports. They do not factor into the star rating. The achievement, to calculate our performance index score, we're looking at the achievement levels that are listed on the left-hand side, and then we're looking at the percent of students that actually scored at each of those levels. And we get a certain level of points for each achievement level. All those points are then added up, and we earned 59.8 points. That's our performance index score. That score then is divided by the max score for the top 2 districts in the state, and that's how they come up with our component percentage that's used to assign our star rating. So we earned a 54.9%.
On this slide, we're comparing the performance index from the 2022 report card versus the 2023 report card. And the first thing I'd direct your attention to would be the points possible for each achievement level, so the purple box. We discussed this a little bit last year, but if you'll notice as we're looking at a achievement level of limited, basic, there's a larger gap that grows, so you get more points. For example, limited is 0.3, where basic is 0.6, so that's a jump of 3. As you get higher towards accomplished or advanced, it's only a jump of 0.1. Towards that overall points received. If you look then at the yellow box, where are the percentage of students that fall in each of those achievement levels that's then multiplied by the points possible, We've done a successful job this year of moving students up. And that starts all the way down at the bottom in green with untested. Last year we had 4.1% of our students that were untested, which automatically gives us a 0. This year we had 1.4%, and that really goes to, at our building level, the testing coordinators and testing teams who have done a really good job of making sure that we're testing as much as possible. So we're not looking at that 0 and then this stuff is used for graduation as well. But if you look at that 4.1%, where did they go? They kind of trickled up, if that makes sense, the column there, moving towards limited, basic moving towards proficient, and then those increasing all the way up through advanced, where we had 3.6% advanced in the year past. We now had 4.2% advanced. And ultimately what that means is it leads to the red box. We increased our points received from 56.4 to 59.8. Next component is called gap closing, and both progress and achievement are sort of recognized in gap closing. Gap closing was the one on the third slide in the bottom right that has 6 different measures that make up gap closing. There's the gifted performance indicator, which then has 3 parts. There's chronic absenteeism, which is new this year. There's English language proficiency improvement indicator, which does not apply to us, and I'll talk about in a minute why. Graduation goals by student subgroups, ELA and math achievement by subgroup, and then ELA and math growth by subgroup. So gap closing is using all of those factors to identify a reduction in educational gaps based on those subgroups. And at the bottom left, we have listed the subgroups that apply for some components. You need to have at least 15 students in each subgroup to get a rating. We did not have 15 students for English language proficiency improvement or English language learners, which is why that component does not apply to us. Our overall percentage for gap closing was 27.8%, which means that we got 15 points out of a possible 54 points. And we'll kind of break down what that looks like. Each one of those measures within gap closing is listed on the left side, and then each part is under the details in the middle column. If you look at the gold box to the far right, that's indicating all the points that were possible for our district to receive based on the subgroup. And then in the blue box indicates the points that were received for each one of those detailed areas of a measure, which was a total of 15 that we received, and then you can see the 54 in red, which was the total possible. 1 second, Cindy. The gifted performance indicator at the top, you'll notice that it says points possible in that middle between the blue and the yellow box. It says 0 or 5, where at the bottom it says up to 10. Up at the top of this chart of this table, anything that says 0 to 5 means that you receive either 0 or 5 points. There's no in the middle. Anything that says up to 10, you could get 1 point, 2 points, 3 points. And we can get anything up to 7 because we have those 7 subgroups identified, or 6 if we're looking at graduation. So looking at gap closing just for gifted, there's 3 parts to that measure. There's the value added met, there's the performance index met, and then there's the gifted identification and services met. For value added met, we did meet that with 3 stars. Anything 3 to 5 stars means that you met that measure. We had 108 points for the performance index, so that was not met. 70 points for the gifted identification and services, and therefore that was not met as well. And this is one of those categories where it's 0 or 5 points for each one of those for a total of 15 points, and we received 5 for the value added met. Looking a little more closely at the 2 measures that we did not meet, looking at the gifted performance index, again this is just looking at that subgroup of gifted students. So it's a performance index similar to what you would see in the achievement component, where it's a breakdown based on achievement levels. The maximum gifted performance index is 120.556. That's based on the top 2% of performing schools, that 120, just like the achievement component. The performance index then, if we just back up one slide, is in the bottom right corner there. We received 108 points, and you can see the percentage breakdown of where our gifted students fall on achievement level, and then multiply by those same percents to get 108 points. Based on that, 108 points out of 120 put us at 89.9%. Just to note, last year we were at 83%. In order to meet that indicator, you needed to be at 96.5%, and it's all or nothing. We did have a significant increase, so we're really looking to meet that next year. To the right side is the gifted identification and services. We received a total points of 70 out of a possible 130 for our district. Gifted identification and service percentage then is 53.8%. You need a 70% in order to meet that indicator. When we look a little closer at the gifted identification and services, the areas where a student could be identified gifted in one or multiple areas is superior cognitive, math, science, reading and writing, social studies, creative thinking, and visual and performing arts. Based on those different categories, there's multiple tables. This is just an example of 3 of them. Based on those categories, you get points not only for identification, but also for serving those students. If you look at the top chart, I just highlighted that bottom left box. Essentially what that's saying is in the grade band from K to 2, if we identified 10% of our students to be either superior cognitive or gifted in a academic area, we would have received 15 points. The table below that in the middle is looking just at services. So if of those students identified K to 2 as gifted in one of those areas or more, if we served 80% of them, we would have received 10 points there. And then it's a little bit different for creative thinking and visual or performing arts because that's a band from K to 12. And if we would have identified or serviced 80% of the identified, that would have been 5 points each. So it just gives you an example of where all those points come from to get to a maximum of 130. The next measure within gap closing is ELA and math achievement. So on the left we have ELA achievement, and on the right we have math achievement based on the subgroup. So each different color is a different subgroup within the district. The bars indicate the achievement level of that specific subgroup, and then the red dots is the individual subgroup's goal that's set by the state. And essentially those red dots are already set for the next, I think, 3 to 5 years. Ahead of time, so that kind of increases over time. Based on those, wherever you see the bar expand through a dot, that's where we receive a point towards the gap closing, and this is one of those where we could get up to 7 points because there's 7 subgroups, and you can see where we receive points based on the plus sign that's on the left and on the right, 3 in ELA and 1 in math, focusing on achievement for those individual subgroups. On this slide now, we're looking at growth for ELA and math. And when we look at growth, we want to see, basically, if we reach a positive 2 as our growth index, you get a point for that exact area. When talking about the growth index, I think it's important to note that anywhere from -2 to +2 is what the state basically identifies as a year's expected growth, falls within that. So if you kind of think like of a normal curve, that -2 to +2 is normal growth, but when you're closing a gap, they want you to reach towards the higher end of that at +2, so that way you're really making up for a year or more's worth of growth for the students. The next component looks at graduation for those individual subgroups, and you'll see that we actually went down to 6 subgroups here because one of the subgroups we didn't have 15 students even in that subgroup in order to graduate. Again, the goal for each individual subgroup is set by the state, and that's what the red dot indicates. And then each subgroup, whenever we reach that goal, counts as a point towards our overall gap closing component. And last measure that makes up gap closing is chronic absenteeism. Chronic absenteeism is measured 2 different ways depending on your district. If you have 36.7% or higher, that was identified for your baseline chronic absenteeism. So last year, we kind of talked a little bit about chronic absenteeism, but it didn't contribute to the component or to the final rating. This year it does. We were in that category. If you decrease or improve your baseline chronic absenteeism by 1.1%, then you met that indicator, and this is a 0 or 5, so we received all 5 points here.
Okay, the next component that we're going to talk about is the early literacy measure. And the early literacy component is looking at reading improvement and proficiency for students in kindergarten through 3rd grade. There are 3 measures that make up the early literacy component. The first is proficiency in 3rd grade reading, and this measure is looking at the Ohio State test, but it's specifically looking at the reading subtest within that whole test. So students have to earn 50 as proficient. So they have to earn 50 in order to be considered proficient in this particular measure, which is different from what we hear often about the promotion scores within the 3rd grade reading guarantee. So while the promotion score was 47 last year, they still had to meet the 50 to be counted in the proficiency. The next measure that's included is the actual promotion to 4th grade, which again, during COVID, this was waived. All students moved on. Last year, we thought that the retention was coming back into play, but then they changed the 3rd grade reading guarantee again, and they made a mandate that all 3rd grade students were to be promoted to 4th grade. None were held back, and so again, this measure is high right now. We might see some dip in that next year because they have added a parent exemption. That's the new addition to the 3rd grade reading guarantee. But just because a parent exempts you, that doesn't mean that that student won't count in the promotion to 4th grade because they have not met the proficiency. So that's that measure. And then the last measure is improving the K-3 literacy. This measure is looking at how we move students that were off track to on track. And we identify students as off track or on track every year in the fall. We give a diagnostic assessment. We use the M-CLASS assessment, which we've talked about before. But we use the M-CLASS assessment, and based off of their CUT score, it identifies whether a student is on track or not on track. So our overall early literacy component, we earned 55.5%. And again, those are made up of the different measures, and each measure has a different weighted percentage. So the proficiency has a 40% weight, the promotion 35, and the improving the K-3 literacy is a 25%. And so that kind of shows you where and how that 55% came up. And then again, when you look at the chart, you'll see that because we were at 55.5%, we're still less than 58, so that was the 1 star. One of the other pieces to the early literacy is really looking at how we're moving students. So in this particular slide, what we're looking at is previously off-track students that we were able to move to on-track. And so when kindergarten students took the diagnostic 2 years ago, last year they moved to 1st grade. So when they took that fall diagnostic, 31.8 of the ones that were off track moved to on track. In 1st grade, when those 1st graders moved to 2nd grade and took the 2nd grade diagnostic last year, we moved 16.9% of those students on track. The 2nd grade to 3rd graders, 13.7. And then in 3rd grade, because there is not another diagnostic in 4th grade, the measure moving forward to identify whether a student is on grade level or not is whether they earned proficient on the state test. So this last, the 3rd grade diagnostic to 3rd grade ELA test is looking at how many students we moved to become on track or proficient because of the state test, and that was 21.1%. So overall, looking at all grade levels of all the students who started last year off track, 21.5% were moved to on track. So anytime a student is identified as off track, they require a reading improvement and monitoring plan. So they receive intensive intervention within their school day. So every student that we're moving on track speaks to how well our interventions are working. And so we're constantly looking and monitoring that and adjusting and increasing or intensifying the service that they're getting. The next slide is looking at the percent of students that were on track in 2021 compared to the students that are on track in 2022. And so this is really looking kind of at not only our tier 1, our core instruction, but also the core instruction combined with intervention. And so what you'll notice is that in 2021, 14.2% of our students, our kindergarten students, were off track versus in 2022, 27.9% of kindergarten students were off track. So every year, if you look from the top graph to the bottom graph, every year we're increasing our number of on-track students. Additionally, you can look at this graph, and if you look at the stars, you can follow a cohort. So if we follow the blue star at the top, 14.2% of kindergarten students in 2021 were on track, compared to in 2022, we increased that to 27.9%. Or the first graders that moved to second grade, they went from 20.3% being on track to 33.3% being on track. And the 25.4% of second graders moved to 31.7% when they moved to third grade. So it's showing over the course of their year how many more we were able to get on track. And it also shows that over time we're growing at every grade level.
And the final component of the overall rating is the graduation component. The graduation component is made up of a 4-year graduation rate and a 5-year graduation rate. It has a total weighted percent. The 4-year graduation rate accounts for 60% of the weighted total, and then the 5-year graduation rate counts for 40% of the weighted total. If you look at both these numbers, they both increased. However, it's worth noting that our 5-year graduation rate increased by just under 4 percentage points. And our total weighted graduation rate of 79.7% is also an increase from last year of just under 2 percentage points. You can also see on the graph below, over the past 5 years, we've increased our graduation rate. And although it looks like that might be kind of flattening out there, it still was an increase of almost 2%. One of the challenges that we discussed last year with our graduation rate, and bringing it up again this year, is anything less than an 84% total, that weighted total, is going to count as 1 star. But you'll notice as once we get to 2 stars, you can climb a little bit easier because that gap, the range within each star rating is smaller. So like right now, 0 to 84%, but once you get to 2 stars, it's only a 6-point jump. Then 3 stars, 3.5-point jump, and then 4 stars is 3 points.
So the next section that we'd like to talk to, that concludes our presentation of the actual report card. And the next thing that we would like to do is just talk to you a little bit about our district achievement plan. And the district achievement plan is made by the district leadership team as well as with our senior leadership team with the guidance of our state support team. We look at all the data that we have for our district, our report card, and any other data that we've collected throughout the year to kind of inform what our goals should be and what the next initiatives or action steps should be. So our goal for this year is graduation, and the district 4-year graduation rate will reach 96.5% in 5 years, with at least 83% of students graduating by the reporting of the 2024 cohort on the state report card. We have 2 objectives to help us meet this goal. The first objective is a curriculum and instruction objective. And within this objective, we're really focusing on intensifying our use of explicit instruction. We're focusing on our dyslexia legislation and how we're implementing that. We're focusing on increasing the effectiveness of our teacher-based teams to ensure the best instruction possible. We're also looking at the selection and the implementation of high-quality instructional materials. And we're also looking at how we can use our branching minds to help us to facilitate uniform use of our MTSS framework.
The second objective under graduation falls in climate and attendance, and really it's looking to increase systems and supports to engage stakeholders and increase opportunities for student success. Just some highlights of what's listed up there, and really looking at attendance as one of them, our work with Proving Ground and the Ohio Improvement Network. In addition, looking for opportunities to improve student success. That goes into the course description guide and looking at the different courses, outlining the graduation requirements, and now really trying to build in different graduation requirements into courses as far as credentials and work-based learning goes. Also increasing our credit recovery programs, summer school, credit recovery during the day, and credit recovery outside of school. And implementing Ohio's Career Connections framework to students using Zello, which is new this year. And up at the top, implementing a curriculum that creates a welcoming environment and a positive environment for student success. We use Responsive Classroom K-8 and Focus 3 at the high school.
That concludes our presentation for the report card. We welcome any questions.
You want to start this side?
Very thorough presentation, but I have a question regarding gap closing as to gifted students. So my question, I'm not trying to understand, are they saying that we're not identifying enough gifted students, or that our school district doesn't have enough gifted students? What does that mean to gap close for students who are higher than average?
Yeah, so it's interesting because this actual component doesn't come down to how students performed on a state test. But they're kind of saying both, and what the state's saying when you look at these tables is that based on the data from across the entire state, they're saying that we should be identifying students at this percentage. It's almost encouraging you to identify, and then also encouraging you to serve those students. When we talk about identifying, though, that includes testing. We do iReady testing at the K-8 level 3 times a year. We do MAP testing at high school level that's course specific 3 times a year. All of those assessments are used to identify students. In addition, we use COGAT testing at currently at first grade and 5th grade that's used to identify students. That's in addition to the iReady. Some things that we're looking at, because this did generate quite a bit of discussion, was what's going to be best practice moving forward to identify students as gifted. And there's several considerations to that. Number one is when you're testing often, you're taking away from class time. In addition, when within that grade band do we test? So one decision that we're evaluating is moving our testing from 1st grade to 2nd grade, and that just gives students more time to develop within that grade band to be identified.
And one other thing that we're looking at too is even the test that we're using to identify. We've previously used the COGAT, which is very commonly used to identify gifted, but it does require some reading. So if kids could be gifted and maybe just aren't a really good reader, but still be gifted. And so there are other assessments which we're looking at to use this year that don't require reading. They're more verbal types of testing. So we're also looking into that. That was one change we're going to try this year. Again, as we started looking at this to say, like, what's
Ms. Kelly, to your point, yes, that's correct. They're saying it's strictly on identification. And it did, our team did have some deep discussion about, is this real, like, we don't want to just earn report card points, but we also talked about, are we doing enough to identify kids that might not otherwise be identified? So it's one of those that if we want to look at this more seriously and see if we were really off the mark, or are we doing it correctly? But it's interesting, as we know, we also are kind of flagged for over-identification of kids on the special needs part of the spectrum, and now we're under-identifying kids on the gifted side. So I think we've got some real work to do in this area to explore it a little deeper. When we talk about how some other districts, as we've learned, students that are transient and some students that live in our community, as Ms. Urbick pointed out, they develop at different rates. And we want to give them we want to remove every barrier. And if we're not finding them and they're gifted, then we want to turn our attention to finding students that are in fact gifted. I also question whether 10% is truly an accurate number. When you look at some of the bell-shaped curve, 10% is, looks like a very high number for at least me personally. I'll have to dig deeper on what really should be identified as a gifted student. But we're going to do a little more exploration here because curriculum did a nice job of pulling this to the open for us, so now we can make a plan for it. We looked at that before. When I was a principal at Chardon Hills, I'm sorry, Ms. Sudar, are you? When I was a principal at Chardon Hills, I also explored this a little bit too, and I noticed some districts were identifying 30-40%, which to me doesn't seem to make sense. So anyway, we're going to do some more digging in this. We're going to do it right, and I don't want us just to say we want 10 points on the report card, so we're going to just, we're not going to do it the wrong way. Right.
Mrs.
So-
Sudar, do you have any questions? Comments?
That was what I was concerned about, because I felt that, they were telling us, giving us impression that they expected us to meet, and if it's not a reality, how do you make that threshold that is specific but fair? And I know through my experience with, kids, friends of my children, who, just the constant testing for identification is very stressful to the kids. And because they just wonder, why am I taking these tests? And why aren't, you want me to be this, but I'm not, so why am I keep taking these tests? So it's been a stressful ways. But we are, the children that we have identified, we are certain. And that's what's, I think, most concerned about this. We identify kids, we find them out.
Is there any, excuse me, is there any questions on this side? Comment?
I had one. Are you able to give, any additional information about that new parent exemption?
Really, the only information I can tell you is that there should be constant communication, at least 3 times a year. Every time we redo our M class, which is fall, winter, and spring, you should be receiving information about how a student did on that. Constant communication with your teacher about how interventions are working, and again, that communication should be coming as well. It's also part of dyslexia to look at what the interventions are. Are they working? If they're not, how are they being intensified? So any parent should be receiving that communication. So you're in constant communication about what the school is doing and how you can support at home. And then through that discussion, as it gets closer to the end of the year, you would have a meeting with the principal, the teacher, and the parent to then make a decision about exemption. Now, what all the requirements are for that are still not clear yet, but from what we've been told, it's as simple as we're having a conference and a parent is making that decision based once they hear all the information. But it's important that the teacher and the principal are also communicating what are the drawbacks to that, because what will happen moving forward, this year it started in 4th grade, next year it will move to 5th grade, is any student who leaves 3rd grade off track will then be off track in 4th grade and require a RIMP plan, which that's what's happening this year. The only way they come off of that RIMP plan, the only way for them to show they're on track now, is a proficient score on their current grade levels state test. So they have to get a 700 on the state test to become on track for the next year. Otherwise, they stay off track and they stay on a reading improvement and monitoring plan, which means they have to have interventions. So it will continuously increase. Potentially a student could be requiring intervention throughout their school career.
Yeah, and the interesting part here is we try to pull it apart a little bit. Don't forget, we're coming out of the pandemic, so it's even hard for us to determine, I think the state to determine what those benchmark lines will look like. The other complexity, as Ms. Urbick was pointing out, is that what's best for the child, to get the exemption and get that focused intervention in grade 3, or to move on to grade 4, as then we know they have to hit the full, they have to make up a lot of ground in a short period of time. So we will obviously, it's great that the board picked up the 2 areas that we ourselves pulled on that thread, both on this very question and on this question of gifted identification throughout breaking down the report card.
Thank you.
Any other questions? I just want to make a comment. I am really glad to see in the last few years or whatever, we're not doing things just the same as it was done before. It's like looks like you guys are trying new things and trying to get better results, and you're not just beating down the same horse. So I appreciate that. I think the district appreciates it, and all the hard work I think is starting to show, and the new curriculums you have bought. I mean, it will be interesting to see in the next couple of years where all this effort has paid off. I think it doesn't just happen in 1 year. I think it's a few years down the line. But I think it's a big investment that was made in this district, and I think you guys are working hard at it. So congratulations. And
Madam
Mrs.
President,
Watson's here too, and I know Mrs. Mamich is out, but you guys are all working together.
Madam President, I also do want to add that to your point about us showing growth. Right here in Euclid, we have a 4.5-star elementary. We saw the presentation from Chardon Hills already. That's as good as, that's up there with any other elementary in the state, which proves our kids can achieve, our programs are working, and it's just going to be the kind of the lead for the rest of the elementaries. We also made the adjustment in the early learning village, which we were excited to see how this is going to come out this year. But the other part that I think was not, is we didn't talk about the schools, and I don't want to steal the middle school's thunder, but they went from being on a state watch list to 3.5 stars. So yeah, that is a celebration. So I mean, we'll celebrate that when the middle school presents. But the work we're putting in is showing results, and the middle school is a success story, and it's very quietly become a success story. We've got ways to go, but 3.5 stars and off the state academic watch list is no small feat, because they were on there for a number of years. So anyway, I appreciate the breakdown of the report card. I knew that there was going to be quite a bit, and you did what I thought was, to both of you, taking a very complex subject matter in really trying to make it understandable, not only for the superintendent, but for the board, but also for our community, so we can really understand it better.
Actually, you reminded me that I did actually have a question. I started to ask it in the moment when you were speaking, and then when he just said that, taking a complex subject matter, I wanted to understand more clearly your district goal related to graduation. Can you explain the district's 4-year graduation rate will reach, I'm sorry. The district's 4-year graduation rate will reach 96.5 in 5 years, so you're talking 28, right?
Well, so the
These are
district,
22 numbers, but
the district achievement plan is based off of the one plan, which already has in there a certain percentage, and basically what we do is move back the percentage each year to reach that percent at the end of the one plan if it had been moving forward.
Okay.
We're
And-
actually, like this year, at the end of this year, we will have to redo our one plan with the state support team, which will then revise all of our goals.
Okay. And can you explain the second half of that to me? When you say by the reporting of the 2024 cohort, is that kindergartners that you're talking about as the 2024 cohort, or
No, that's the graduating class, so those would be all
of
the
next
students.
year?
Right, who would.
This year?
Of this year, who would traditionally
Okay.
graduate at the end of this
That the
year.
goal would be the 83% this year?
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
So it's slightly more than 3%, is that what we're looking, that we were at, we're at, so where do we stand right now?
Our
70
overall was 79
nine.
point, I think so,
Right,
79.7.
7, so we're
So we need a
three
about a
point-
4%
3.3,
increase.
yeah.
Correct.
So that's what we're gearing in on. We also did some work, and I think it's in the plan here, on creating, graduation plans also for individual children that the counselors can work. We're looking at the data side of things, so we're looking at this, from a multiple different ways. I think, was it this year that we presented, or was it last year on the course descriptions? That was this year at board meeting. So
I
that
think it was
it's-
over summer, I can't remember when, but if you look at the graduation requirements are fairly complex, and there's a lot to keep track of in the 3 different categories. So we have, started that work of tracking students as they go throughout that, and really tracking them all the way through from 9th grade through graduation.
Thank you.
Thank you.